I'm Karen Fong, and I was, let's see, what can I tell you? I think I have been a designer for as long as I can remember. Of course, I didn't know it was called a designer, but I always loved to make things. Even as a child, I liked making little books and comic books. And then I had a Super 8 camera and made my own little films with cut paper, cut them out, and animate them one by one. And just the idea of moving pictures and animation always fascinated me. I grew up in Los Angeles, so I've always been near the film industry. Although my family didn't work in it, my mother is a school teacher, and I would do little drawings and films for her class sometimes. But when I got into university, well, first when I was in school, I always did things like the yearbook, on the school paper. And even when I was a cheerleader in high school, I would do all the big signs that would say, "Go Eagles," and draw them so the football players could run through them. So I was always drawing and expressing myself in some sort of commercial art. In fact, I remember even when I was in third grade, you have to do a little report of what you want to be when you grow up. And I had a little Hello Kitty with a art thing, but I said it was a commercial artist because I always liked the idea of the art and the design being for lots of people. And I knew that even as a child. And so when I went to university, I majored in art, studio art, which meant painting and drawing and photography, and and I ended up concentrating in graphic design, and that meant my first exposure to typography, which I feel is such an expressive part of my work. And I can even see as a child I would be interested in that because I was always interested in doing things like calligraphy and hand lettering. And one of the things that really pushed me to this direction was doing an animated alphabet book when I was in college. And I'd scan my own drawings into the computer and combine it with other things. So it was a wonderful sort of collage of ideas that would animate. And I think I always took that idea that even though you use the computer, you don't have to make everything in the computer. You can bring things from the world. And actually, it's wonderful to bring, hand done things and photography and real things into the computer and combine them with computer generated things for sort of a hybrid kind of design. I think I always noticed design, even as a child, because one of my favorite programs ever was Sesame Street. And I don't know if you know this program, but it has a lot of short animated segments that teaches kids the numbers and letters. And they would have different animators, and of course Henson, who did the Muppets, Kermit the Frog, and all of those puppets. They would all do different little segments. For the alphabet. And so sometimes you would see something stop motion, and sometimes you would see something a cartoon, and sometimes you would see a puppet. And I think even as a child, I was interested in all of these ways that you could be doing something on screen that looked, that had different styles and different ways of designing on screen. I get inspiration from all kinds of places. I love looking at children's books and illustration. I love to travel. I think seeing just different parts of the world is incredibly stimulating. It's wonderful being here right now. I'm sitting here in Tokyo after the Motion Plus Design event. I have the privilege of being able to see this culture and to absorb things visually and just culturally and just be in the world. I love to look at design, but I don't always like to just look at just design. I think that might be too small of a world. And I like to, be out in the world and try to see, different places and how different people live and talk to different people. I feel a lot of the inspiration comes from that. Another huge inspiration is from the stories I work with. So if I'm working on a show or a movie, I'm always hugely inspired by the script and the production design or the world. So if it's a historical a historical show or takes place in a different time period, like Boardwalk Empire took place in the 1920s, I will research everything about the 1920s, all the history. Or for Counterpart, that took place, it took place sort of like in the recent past. And so looking at all the kind of technology of the 80s and early 90s was really interesting, as well as making references to Cold War Berlin. So getting into whatever world, whether it's the art or the technology or the history of that world, is always very inspiring for the work. I have been at Imaginary Forces for over 20 years. I'm one of the founding members, which means I was there when it began in 1996. I actually started working with this group a few years before because we were an office called RGALA, or Our Greenwork Associates Los Angeles, before we became Imaginary Forces. And so it's wonderful to be working with many of the same people over years and years. You've developed a certain culture and shorthand to what you are doing. People always ask me, how do you work at a place like that for so long? But I have to say, every day and every project is so new that I'm always making new mistakes and learning new things and having new subject matter to work on. And I work with a lot of very talented people. I think my number one piece of advice to people is to work with people better than you are. And I work with animators and designers and writers and art directors and producers and whatever. And the wonderful thing is that we're very nimble. So whether I'm working on something that's a live action project where I have to shoot, or a bigger project that has a lot of branding components or story components, whether it's for something that's a big projection, like we've done projections for the opera or for architecture, or something that's tiny that goes on your phone, we are able to adjust, and there aren't any categories for us that we design freely between all these different kinds of work. One of the best things about working on these film projects and television projects is working with a fantastic team. So I always, when working teams large and small, it could be a team as small as 2 or 3 people to larger teams of 9, 10, even more people. And sometimes even switching teams. You might have a team for the live action and then a different team for the post. And then, of course, I'm working with teams on to concept it through the finish. And everybody contributing their area of expertise. And I think that is a way of getting some interesting ideas and interesting things. And ideas come from everybody, whether they are an animator, a designer, or producer, or a writer we're working with. The ideas, I think, to pull all of the best ideas together and synthesize them in a way that makes sense for the project. I think title sequences are important because they set the tone and the mood for a program. So they become a portal or an entrance that kind of invites the viewer in. So you're dealing with so many things in your day before you start a story. Maybe, you've just finished dinner, or you just sat down to enjoy your show, and you need something to kind of ease you into this other world. And I think that's one of the roles of the title sequence. And not to be underestimated too, a title sequence is to credit the people to have made this show, and most shows have an incredible amount of people working very hard on them, and there's something very lovely about being able to see who worked on these programs. The Counterpart main titles were really fun, mostly because Justin Marks had invented this whole world where the whole world split into 2, and one side doesn't know about the other. So imagine if it's a parallel world and there's another you living another life, and there was a sort of DMZ, or like Checkpoint Charlie passageway between them, but you didn't know about it. You didn't know about this other person. And so his idea was about, well, how much of your life is your destiny and how much of it is fate? And to illustrate that, we use the metaphor of a Go game. So the main character, Howard Silk, plays a daily game of Go every day. And Go is an interesting game. And so we use this idea of a Go game splitting into two different Go games, and you don't know where they're going to lead. Maybe they'll come back and meet back into the middle. That was sort of an idea that we had. And the second part is, well, besides using the Go game, is also to create a dystopian landscape where you have figures that feel that they are lost and they are trying to maybe find each other within this environment. And for that, I had a lot of inspiration looking at the architecture of Berlin, which is one of the settings, or is the setting of the show. But also, it was a real treat. I got to visit the sets in Los Angeles, where they recreated all this Cold War sort of era technology inside these beautiful sets, very good period piece design, and was able to shoot a lot of photography and shoot some elements to combine. So the whole piece is kind of a mix between live action and real objects and things that we created in CG. So you're always moving back and forth between, something close and something wide, and always using the motif of circles and grids like a Go game. Our original ideas were very much a montage of seeing the set. And then HBO said, no, we wanted to do something very interesting so people would wonder about what the show is. And so we centered the whole sequence of Boardwalk Empire on the character of Nucky, and he's played by Steve Buscemi. And he's kind of like the kingpin center of the whole story. He's kind of a gangster and a politician, and he runs the mob, because Boardwalk Empire is a very interesting story. It's set in Atlantic City, which is on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and it's during Prohibition. So that means that liquor is outlawed. And so because it's on the sea, it's a perfect place for smugglers, rum runners, to bring in liquor from Canada and other places and sell it. And so the mob, organized crime, is, directing on this, and Nucky has a part of that. And so the reason why he looks out into the ocean and sees all these bottles is because the fortunes of his life in Atlantic City is all in the liquor coming in. But it's a very strange and surreal way to see it, right? To see that that's what the story is about. But the idea is that there'll be storms that come and go, but he will always be in the center, in the calm. You'll see we did a shot where the wave goes back from his feet as if he's untouchable. Just the idea that he is somehow controlling things from a position where he isn't getting his hands dirty. The idea behind Black Sails is to sort of depict this idea that what if the pirates, who are kind of the rebels and the outcasts of the world, ran society? And so we took the icons of European aristocracy and the church and replaced them with pirate imagery and hid skulls in them. And all these details that are very macabre. We looked a lot at the pictures of the cemeteries in Paris and in Italy, and the kind of mausoleums and the churches. Because in the very beginning, Alan Williams, with whom I worked on this project, found these beautiful photographs where you saw cathedrals being submerged in water. Well, we didn't really have the budget to do a cathedral and submerge it in water, but we could build the altarpieces and all those kind of sculptures, and then feel like they are being submerged in water. So we were another huge influence is the artist Chris Kutsky, who does these wonderful assemblages. He takes all kinds of pieces of different sculptures and puts them together into these very strange 3D collages. And so we are looking a lot at that and how we could mix the Baroque elements and the pirate elements into one piece. And the idea is that the whole piece is an allegory of what is happening in this age of pirating. In every scene there are some skulls, that death is always looming and lurking. We see that now the places that used to be saints and kings are replaced by thieves and whores and all kinds of nefarious people, and but the idea that they're all reaching and grabbing for the flag at the end kind of is a symbol of the ambition of these pirates and trying to build this new society. For me, a good title sequence is unique to the show. I think one thing we always try to do is find the metaphor or the idea and the central tone of the show and try to distill that into a very short piece, whether it be 15 or 30 or 60 seconds. You're taking a big world and finding a way for people to experience it in a tiny little bit. And I think that's the most interesting thing, is that you're trying to get the emotional effect. You're trying to get people to be very curious and want to enter. You're not telling them information so much as to invite them in. I think if you can get people to be curious and enjoy this passageway into the show, then it's a very successful title sequence. One of my favorite parts of the job is concepting the work. I love to look at it like it's a puzzle, and I'm trying to crack a code of like what will best represent the show. So I love that period in the beginning where there's a blank storyboard or a blank piece of paper, and you're trying to think of the ideas and the stories and the visuals that will go into it. Another part that I really enjoy is whenever I'm shooting, because I feel very present and in the moment to find things in our world to put into the title sequence. I think the idea of mixing things that are both analog and digital is very interesting as well. There are a lot of parts of the process I really love. The great thing is I'm working with people, and sometimes, an animator or an editor will come up with something that I didn't think of even, and, switch things around, and it will be better. And that is such a nice surprise when that happens. But overall, I think I do what I do because I love to think of the ideas. I love to think of clever ways. I used to call it like an aha moment, like these ways of explaining something complicated in a simple way. Well, one of the number one challenges in the title design industry is the budgets. The budgets are very small. And it's kind of funny because you will get a much larger budget for sometimes the marketing or other parts of the show, or for advertising. But in general, for what we are doing, titles are severely under budgeted, and so that's always a very big part of the challenge. And I think yes, I think working with that kind of dictates a lot of the solutions, or it makes you work harder as a designer, of course, because you have to be, the constraints are always kind of what tests you, your creativity. But I would definitely say, it would be nice to have a little bit more in that department, and we should all, as designers, sort of work towards that, so our ideas have a little bit more to flourish. Oh gosh, my favorite movie will often depend on what mood I am in. For instance, love the movie Grease for when I want to sing along. I always love Star Wars. I love a lot of Wes Anderson films because they are so funny and visually wonderful. And I love Rare Window by Alfred Hitchcock is a favorite. I could watch that almost any time. There's so many. Well, working with clients is actually one of the great things of what I do, the collaboration, because I do have very creative clients creating the films and the shows and the things I design for. When there is a conflict or a difference of opinion, I always find it's helpful to, show two ways or a couple different ways of approaching a problem. Sometimes I will show the way that is requested, but then my team and I will think of, show an alternate way and say, look, maybe we do this, and try to because a lot of times you can't see and even for me, there'll be a suggestion. I'm like, oh, I don't really agree with that, and I'll try it, and I'll be like, oh, actually, that is better. So, I think the I one thing to always remember in the process is that there's a little bit of it's a bit of wet clay. You know, things aren't so you do this exactly. Sometimes you discover things along the way, and you have to course correct, and that direction can come from yourself. There are times when I'm like, I know I did wanted to do this, but let's do this instead. And then sometimes it comes from a client. And so it's a lot of back and forth. And I think the best way to deal with it is to talk about it, but also have things to look at and compare and to see and try to make the best choices together. Well, I've always been lucky enough to work in the studio. So I mean, I get a lot of energy from the people around me. And I love to bounce ideas off people. I like the work day. There are a couple times a week, maybe I work at home, and the energy is different. It's different. I enjoy it, but I enjoy it for when I have to write and concept and concentrate. But I also like the energy when I'm working in a group and looking at things together and collaborating. And certainly on set, you know, when you have a lot of different people with different disciplines, that's also a fantastic way of collaborating. So I feel the difference between working on studio and on one's own is, you know, the level of interaction. You know, how much daily interaction or energy that you get from other people. And I think it varies. There's different parts of the project which I think are better for working in solitude, and others that where you definitely want to have your team around you. I try to work on the balance of work and family, but it's always tipping very one way or the other. Right here in Tokyo right now, for my family is here. My two children and my husband all came when I got the invitation to speak. We decided to make a family trip on it, and I think more and more as my children get a little bit older. They are 7 and 9 right now. We can do more things together, and some of those things are my work. It's it is tricky though because this design industry is very very demanding, and so I try to do some things where I sometimes work at home for a day or two during the week, or if there are things I can do to involve them in my work, I try to. Like we once had a shoot, and I would invite them to the set, and they were actually they were extras. They were trick or treaters in one of my scenes. And then I also have tried to set some boundaries where I know, and my studio is very good at working with me on that. Where you know around bedtime or mealtime with them, I don't have calls. I don't. I try very hard not to be on my phone, you know, and so when I'm with them, I'm very much with them, and on the weekends and all our time as family time, to be able to concentrate on them. But I have to say sometimes, you know, it tips a little bit this way or that way because, as we all know, the deadlines pop up and are sometimes unpredictable. So it is quite a bit to manage. I say I very, one of my big secrets is that my husband is wonderful and helps me a lot with that. And we also have a very good nanny and babysitter who helps with all of that. And so to get all of us together, make it so both my husband and I can work and also have a family life. I have a couple projects coming up, some more television titles. One where I got to shoot with the Phantom camera. I don't know if you know it. It's a very, very high speed camera. It could go like 1,000 frames per second, which was really fun to shoot with. That was all done with live action, which is a little bit different because I'm usually combining a lot of digital. So that is coming up. And I also have a title that is about to come out that has to do with fairy tales. It's really nice. It's the dark kind of like Grimm's fairy tales, kind of updated, and so we use a metaphor of thorns and flowers and things, and it's and so that's coming out in December. I've always been fortunate to work with other women in this industry. Like one of my close colleagues was Michelle Doherty, who was also at Imaginary Forces for some time. We worked together for over 2 decades. And so I always, and that we always had other female designers around. And so I was insulated a little bit from the fact that this industry doesn't, is mostly male. I think I would feel the impact of the being a female director mostly on set, where maybe somebody at craft service serving the food would say, "Oh, you're the first female director that I've worked with," and they'd been in the business for a while. And I'd be like, "Really?" It's happening less and less and less. There are more female directors, so I feel. That's when I feel it most, that, oh, wow, this is something unusual. But I've been always very inspired by strong female and strong women around me. So I'm happily hadn't had to think about it so much, but I do get the question, and I do have other women designers ask me about it, and I know it's something we must work together and to try to increase the visibility and opportunity for female creative directors, designers, directors, and leadership, creative leadership for women. I'm happy to say that there are many parts of my job right now that are a dream job, but I think my dream job would be, uh, I think I've always dreamt of creating content for children. I think I got into this industry, as I think I mentioned, because of a love for Sesame Street, and I also did a lot. I originally thought when I was in college I would do children's books because I loved the way narrative works with the imagery and the words together to merge into one. But now I think perhaps there might be something out there where I could create stories or content for children. The exciting thing is that maybe it's in a way that I'm not even sure of yet. One of my idols is the woman who created Sesame Street, Joan Gans Cooney, and I always think that when she was a little girl, she couldn't have said, "Oh, I want to create children's television," because it didn't exist in the same way. She was the one who went on to create Sesame Street and create what we know as children's sort of edutainment right now. But when she started, there weren't shows like that. And I think even just a decade ago or so, we couldn't have thought of doing apps or other kinds of technology. I was just at the dinner for Motion Plus Design last night, and I was seated next to an interactive designer, and the way that you can environmentally control imagery with programming is so new, and there's new ways of doing content and technology. So, and it's changing so fast that I like to think that maybe I don't even know what my dream job is yet.